Hi, I'm a scientist, but don't be intimidated. In fact, by the end of this video, I want you to question everything I say. I'm an astronomer. Strangers are often excited to meet me. Oh, you're an astronomer. I'm a Pisces. What's my horoscope? I usually roll my eyes and dramatically pronounce, well, there will be conflict in the Middle East, partisan bickering in Congress, and fluctuations in the stock market. But in truth, confusing astronomy with astrology is excusable since the first astronomers were astrologers. Astrologers believed there was a link between heavenly bodies like the sun, moon, and planets and our affairs on Earth. Early astrologers correlated the sun's motion across the sky with seasonal changes. This in turn allowed farmers to optimize the planting of their crops. Even Johannes Kepler, whose 3 laws of planetary motion are still in use today, and after whom NASA named a satellite, he even dabbled in astrology as well. So, what's wrong with astrology? Why isn't it taught at our top universities? Because it isn't science, and its practitioners aren't scientists. Instead, astrologers confuse correlation, the position of the sun in the sky, with causation, crop yields, which is as close to a cardinal sin as exists in science. So what is science? Strictly speaking, there isn't a strict definition. But since the 1600s, it's been accepted that scientists should practice the scientific method. The scientific method is the most marvelous tool for knowledge generation ever devised. The method involves systematic observation and experimentation, formulation of hypotheses, deductions about those hypotheses, experimental testing of the deduction, and presentation to other experts. Often this is done in an adversarial fashion known as peer review. Iterate this process for a few decades or hundreds of years, and if things stand the test of time, you just might be doing science. Now, how does astrology fare against this rubric? Observations and measurements? Check. Hypothesis? Check. Testing? Check. If you notice, your local newspaper probably devotes more space to astrology than astronomy. So perhaps the scientific method is insufficient. To augment the scientific method, the eminent philosopher Karl Popper suggested a brilliant addendum. Popper said that a subject is scientific if and only if it can be falsified. Let that sink in. Falsified, not proven. Popper said that it must be possible for a claim to be proven wrong, that is, falsified, to ascertain whether that discipline was scientific or not. Popper said astrologers' prophecies were sufficiently vague that they, in his words, were able to explain away anything that might have been a refutation of their theory had the prophecies they made been more precise. In order to escape falsification, they destroyed the testability of their theory. So, if your theory is untestable, if it can't be proven wrong, it's probably not science. So, it's simple. Trust scientists who can be proven wrong. Well, not so fast. It depends on what you mean by trust. If by trust you mean obey, you should probably think a second time. For example, Aristotle was a scientist. He observed that whales were mammals, not fish. He codified the rules of logic and philosophy that are still used 2,300 years after his death. But he also believed there were only 4 elements when there are actually over 100. He believed the Earth was the center of the universe. It isn't. And he believed that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. They don't. Galileo falsified most of what the great Aristotle said, showing there is no place for authority in science. As Galileo said, in questions of science, the authority of 1,000 is not worth the humble reasoning of a single individual. Yet even Galileo had his share of blunders, including hypothesizing that comets were in the Earth's atmosphere. They aren't. And that the tides on the Earth's oceans are caused by its motion around the sun, instead of the true cause, the moon's gravitational pull. Isaac Newton was a scientist. He developed calculus, discovered the law of universal gravitation, codified the laws of optics, and much, much more. He also practiced alchemy, was sympathetic to astrology, and spent a fair amount of time torturing and executing counterfeiters. Fritz Haber was a scientist. He was a German Jew born in 1868. Haber invented the chemical process that enabled you to eat breakfast this morning. He won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for inventing a fertilizer production method that today feeds half of the population. He was also fiercely nationalistic. In World War I, Haber led a special chemical warfare unit. He recruited fellow scientists, including 3 future Nobel laureates, to serve as gas troops alongside him. Haber insisted on witnessing horrific chlorine gas warfare by the German army in 1915, which claimed tens of thousands of Allied lives. 3 years later, Haber won the Nobel Prize, and he never expressed remorse for his role in immoral war crimes. Crimes that Germany itself had signed onto the League of Nations prohibition against in 1908. Haber later would go on to invent an insecticide called Zyklon B. A decade after his death, the Nazis' final solution used tons of that poison gas at Auschwitz and Treblinka. Among those killed in those gas chambers were members of Haber's own family. More recently, scientist James Watson, co-recipient of the 1962 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering DNA's double helix structure, horrifically said he was gloomy about Africa because all of our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours. Watson also suggested that rich people should be paid to have children because if there is any correlation, he said, between success and genes, IQ will fall if the successful people don't have children. William Shockley was a scientist. He co-invented the transistor, the very device that powers the screen you're watching this video on. Later, he mendaciously claimed that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable by improvements in the environment. These disgusting ideas, all promulgated by scientists, some of whom won Nobel Prizes. Should they be trusted? Should we obey their proclamation, no matter how odious they are? Obviously not. We might want to listen to their opinions in the scientific realm about fertilizers, DNA, and transistors, but their repugnant moral opinions on race, on warfare, on social policy, it's disgusting to even consider. As Italian philosopher of science Marcello Pera has shown, science advances as scientists argue about how to interpret evidence. Premature appeals to an alleged consensus or authority can short-circuit the necessary deliberation and lead to unwarranted conclusions, impeding scientific advances. The false perception of scientific consensus or authority by individuals perceived as brilliant can form the basis of rigidly enforced authoritarian policy. So, scientists are supposed to be domain experts, not ethical experts. That's why we in democratic countries elect politicians, not to submit to rule by scientific experts that are unelected. Nobel laureate Richard Feynman cautioned his fellow scientists, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Feynman added that scientists should go to great lengths to show not only how they're likely to be right, but how they could possibly be wrong. He said, doing so is our, quote, responsibility as scientists, certainly to other scientists, but also to laymen as well. You can judge a society by who it chooses to venerate. For generations, people have rightfully looked to scientists as merchants of truth, keepers of facts, walking Wikipedias. In fact, the word science comes from the Latin scientia, meaning knowledge. But knowledge doesn't equal wisdom. As the old saying goes, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. Because the public trusts scientists' subject matter expertise, their knowledge, lay people often feel scientists' wisdom is also unimpeachable and unbiased. But the opposite is true. Studies show scientists are among the most polarized members of society when it comes to policy on controversial issues like abortion, stem cell research, and climate change. Unlike the discovery of a far-off exoplanet, which is fascinating, but not impactful on our daily lives, obeying scientific opinion about hot-button social issue just because we are scientists is an example of the unwarranted halo effect bias. Science is always provisional. and politicizing it is bad for science. What one politician sees as expert wisdom, another may later declare to be heretical. A lesson Galileo learned in 1633 when his evidence for the sun-centered solar system was fact-checked false by scientific experts during the Inquisition. Sometimes scientists cultivate an invincible image, refusing to share disconfirming evidence about their work, exactly as Feynman inveighed against. Scientists are human. You shouldn't expect scientists to be free from prejudices that all people possess. Biases like groupthink, greed, tribalism, and ego. Ignoring the non-scientific motivation of scientists is also bad for science. When a molecular biologist advises who you should vote for, you may not trust her about the benefits of a new vaccine or type of gene therapy. So, don't trust me, at least not my opinions about abortion, the morality of capitalism, or who to vote for. Do listen to scientists about our areas of expertise, learn from our passionate curiosity, learn from our integrity, and emulate our adversarial yet cordial approach to converging on truths. Ask us questions and demand answers, answers you can understand. Your taxes allow us to do our jobs, but don't expect any special wisdom from us. That would be most unscientific.